Hello and welcome to There's No Business Like, a podcast where friends and industry colleagues explore topics and interview leaders in our industry of professional theatrical touring.
Welcome back to There's No Business Like. I am Josh Benson from the Marion Cultural and Civic Center, and I'm here with my friends, Katie.
Hi, everyone. Katie Miller with Michigan Maven Creative Associates, coming to you from Midland, Michigan.
Kevin
Maynard coming at you from Tallahassee with opening nights at Florida State University.
And since we have the important ones on the podcast here, sorry, Brian. Sorry, Danielle.
Not sorry.
We are just doing a summer check-in to talk about kind of how we're feeling about the industry right now, both in a positive and a negative way. So let's start off and go heavy first. Kevin, what right now is kind of in the back of your mind that you are worrying about and thinking about with the industry right now?
You know, to be honest, Josh, I don't know that there's a lot like in the industry that I'm worried about. And I know that sounds weird, but I think it's more like the things that are happening industry adjacent. And not to get too heavy right off the bat, but I think just everything that we're seeing with the ICE raids and things happening in LA and just sort of like the overall response to that, sending in the military to a U.S. city, that's all pretty heavy. And so when I think about that, I think about the nation as a whole, but also you start thinking about what are those repercussions on our industry. And those sort of things have repercussions that are far ranging. So obviously you can take the easy one and say, oh, well, it's people not going to shows. Because either, they're no longer here or they're afraid to leave their homes. But then you also think about those things will have repercussions as like a major economic impact. And then it stems into other people who can no longer afford to come to these performances or go out and do those things because their other expenses have gotten higher. So that's really what is top of mind right now for me.
What does dipping your toes into martial law really do for a societal outlook as far as things like the arts and entertainment are concerned? Does that become further ancillary to people's focus versus just being thought of as a luxury to being thought of as something, well, this isn't nearly as important when the Marines are on my doorstep?
Absolutely. And it's been interesting. The last couple of days, I've sort of inadvertently had these conversations with folks about how, the arts are the great unifier. And, in a time that people have described as the most divisive in their lifetime, the arts are there to be a unifier. And then I'd say that sometimes it's not, because people aren't open to different political views or just the idea that somebody might go on stage and say something that they disagree with because of their political views. And so it's, to me, like all of this stuff is sort of like swimming in the same pool, and it's becoming, very intertwined and kind of difficult to sort of really propose that the arts are a great unifier in this time. I think they have the potential, and I think there's definitely an opportunity there. But then I also wonder, should it be? Are we doing ourselves a disservice if it's just kumbaya?
So one of the things that sticks out to me is that Donald Trump just attended his first performance at the Kennedy Center to see Les Miserables. And there's footage of when he first appears in the hall. And it was posted under the premise of people booing him. But whenever I actually went to the video, there are some boos, but there are also a lot of cheers.
It's massive cheers.
That is a diverse audience to see musical theater, because there were both boos and cheers for him at that show. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know what that really means, but I also see that as you had a pretty equitable audience to see that musical as far as their political views at that performance. And even though it was presented as listen to all of these boos, that's not what I saw whenever I clicked on the video. I saw reactions from both sides within the room.
Josh, that's a really interesting point. I mean, that alone is a really great example of actually how the arts can be a great unifier. And also a really interesting conversation about how that show speaks to two very different audiences who would both,
especially at this very moment,
who would both argue it's about the other side, which I think is some beautiful irony there.
So Katie, what do you feel right now? What is lingering in the back of your mind at these times?
I'm aligned with Kevin in that I am concerned about just the greater state of our country at the moment and the ramifications and repercussions. Most recently, the House just voted to claw back money for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which will directly affect public television and public radio across the country. And for me, as a huge supporter and believer in public broadcasting, as not only a source of information, necessary information for particularly rural communities across the country, but a purveyor of arts and culture programming as well, and commentary and access points to music, to filmed theater performances, to documentary films, to education. That is hugely concerning for me from an access and freedom of the press perspective. And I think that will also have indirect ramifications for the performing arts industry as well. So that is very much in the front of my mind at the moment. I think my other concern is, and I know things are happening out in our industry, lots of conversations, there's work being done, but we have not yet seen a publicly united front in terms of the messaging of why the arts matter and why we still need people to support the arts in their local communities. We've bandied around the idea a couple of times of some sort of national campaign, marketing campaign, or along the lines of like, got milk, right? Like some unifying message that really helps promote our industry as an industry and engages people in a really thoughtful and clever way. This is the moment where we need that sort of messaging. And I don't see it happening. And that is not my area of expertise. I am not the person to make that happen, but I know that there is a clever, thoughtful, brilliant individual out there that can figure out how to make that work and how to uplift the entire industry and keep it on people's radars so that even if they can't afford a $50 or $100 ticket, they might still be able to afford a $12 ticket to take their kid to a really good concert in the park, right? And maybe we're scaling back, but like, how do we still do that messaging? How do we keep people engaged even as things shift around us? Yeah, I'm just worried that we're not looking at the industry as a whole and we get very, very focused on our local communities and our local impacts, and that it's going to get lost in the sauce of all of the other things.
I think for it to be truly impactful, I don't think like a national tagline or national campaign is going to do it as much as something grassroots that actually comes from unifying the local arts across the country and then it being a grassroots push in that way. Because it is just my perspective, but you have to get people to care locally for it to matter. And a national tagline headline isn't going to do that as much as something that is organic from the arts within the communities.
But I think it also gives people an opportunity to sort of like attach themselves to something nationally, like gives them something to like piggyback on. So I definitely see where you're coming from, Josh. I think more of like what I see, like that national campaign is almost like that top of mind for the arts in general, and then like encourages people to check out local. And you're right, it doesn't work unless the locals also tap into that.
I think it's a multi-level approach, Josh, to your point. Like, but there's got to be some sort of umbrella messaging that pushes back against the other narratives that are being put forward in terms of, you know, the arts are too liberal, the arts are pushing a woke agenda, the arts aren't valuable because they don't bring anything economically. That's bullshit. We all know that, right? The studies disprove that. And so what is the national messaging that we can put out that unifies across all the different arts, right? We're talking visual arts and performing arts and then filters down that, like Kevin said, we could build on locally in our own communities. In my opinion, there needs to be better unified national messaging around the value of the arts. It can't just be individual artists and individual companies and organizations pulling random statistics and putting them out on their Instagram to try and prove a point. Like, what is the unified national messaging around that?
It would be great if we had something like a National Endowment for the Arts or something like that, or they could really like help to spur that on.
Well, we all know what is happening there.
Or maybe like a big national theater based in DC that could kind of kickstart some of that.
I mean, to be fair, we are talking about the Kennedy Center way more than we ever have.
Oh my God.
100%.
True.
You know?
It's true.
Benson, what about you?
I've been thinking a lot about what's happened with the NEA and humanities, and I mean, what is present in the current budget bill. And my fear is that nonprofit boards across the country will start preemptively making cuts and cutting programs and cutting staff and downsizing on their own preemptively prior to actually knowing what's actually going to happen, as opposed to waiting to see where we land, preemptively cutting things and using NEA as an excuse to downsize their programs. I fear that progress that has been made within the arts as far as size of organizations and footprint of organizations is going to severely be cut unnecessarily as a preemptive action.
Yeah, it'll also be, I wish there was a way that we could actually see and know what programs are cut in response to that, or what people are just using the NEA to cover, for whatever reason, whether that's a financial thing or just a change in mission. But it's easy to say like, oh, the NEA, we normally get this much, so now we can no longer do this.
And it's also a lot easier for an organization to say, hey, let's make this cut, as opposed to, hey, let's work harder to make up this difference. And for boards to be choosing the ease of making cuts as opposed to, this is going to be hard, but let's figure out a way to push forward and make this all still work and happen on a slimmer operating. I mean, that's hard to figure out, but it's not impossible. And it's, once again, it's where I'm saying that unnecessarily making cuts that don't have to be made because it's an easy out.
Yeah.
I can fully see that happening. I think that is a valid concern. And I think part of this is because people are tired. I mean, it has been a tumultuous 5 years, and that's putting it mildly. And I just don't know if people have the energy to fight the fights anymore. And I think that is another concern, right? We've had a lot of conversation about burnout and about wellness and taking care of ourselves so that we can better serve our communities. I think that probably extends to boards now as well, because while they're not in it day to day, the weight of people's livelihoods and facilities and things like that have, I feel like, crept more and more onto the shoulders of boards as staff turnover happens and these funding crises are happening. So I can see people just kind of shrugging their shoulders and doing exactly what you're saying because they're too tired to figure out the creative solutions.
Well, and additionally, if they're just seeing the financial breakdowns at the end of the day and they're not seeing the actual operating and how things do operate and how things could be streamlined, then from a bird's eye view with just a budget sheet in front of you, that's the option. Because you don't have the operations in front of you.
So that's where storytelling comes into this picture. I think that it might mean that boards have to be not more involved in the day-to-day, but we need to invite our boards into classroom spaces to see what happens when you have kids learning together and make sure that they're attending performances, making sure that they are physically at community engagement opportunities in our community so they see what the impact is. Because you're right. They're just looking at a budget sheet. They're looking at a bottom line. So how do we get them to be physically present to really see impacts? Because I don't know that we do enough of inviting boards into those spaces and helping them understand the real true impacts that our work has.
Using narratives and storytelling to give an understanding of how the operations actually function. So with all of that uplifting discussion,
let's just end it right here. This is good.
Done.
So, Katie, where is one place that you see hope and see a brighter future right now?
Oh, can I go first? It's all in Josh's eyes.
Aw. I know you guys have a bromance, but like...
Sorry, go on.
I love it. No, actually, I am still buzzing from the Tony Awards. So we're recording a week after the Tony Awards. And huge Broadway fan, of course, musical theater fan in general, but I so enjoyed the telecast and every piece and part of it. I think the Broadway season in general this year, but the elevation of work at the Tonys this year, I think was actually incredibly inspiring and has me hopeful for the future. So first of all, like the nominations of the shows across the board, I think were well-deserved. And those that won, the shows that won technical awards and design awards, as well as those that won acting awards, so incredibly diverse. Our awardees this year were incredibly diverse, from Francis Ju winning for Yellowface, Nicole Scherzinger, Darren Criss being the first Asian American man to win a leading actor award, Cole Escola being the first non-binary individual to win for a play, Kara Young for Purpose. I mean, across the board, the individual award winners were incredibly diverse, and the stories that they were portraying on stage, I don't know, I haven't done the math, I haven't looked, but it felt like the stories that were being told on Broadway this year were very purposeful, very insightful into our current moment. They were interrogating our current moment in ways that we haven't quite seen before, and also infused hope into a lot of those things. I think one of the reasons we love maybe Happy Ending, Josh, is because it is lovely and hopeful. It's thought-provoking, but like also joyful at the same time. But there was a lot of joy as well as a lot of deep thought put into the shows this season. And I think Broadway is a bellwether for theater across the rest of the country. It informs what other theaters are going to do, from high school theaters all the way through regional professional theaters. So if that is a bellwether for the types of shows we're going to see, what playwrights are putting out, the types of actors and acting performances we're going to see across the country, I feel like in that way, the future is really bright. Like, I am just still so jazzed about what happened at the Tonys and what happened on Broadway this year.
And I think this is a direct result of the Broadway League and American Theater Wing have been making a push since 2020 for more diversified Broadway product.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there have been intentional programs in place that have led to the diversification of Broadway.
Two other things coming out of the Broadway season I wanted to note that make me hopeful for the future. So Dana Taymor, who won a Tony last year for The Outsiders and was nominated, her show, John Proctor's The Villain, was nominated across the board this year, are both telling the stories of teenagers and of young people. Different perspectives from different points of history, but we are telling young people's stories on Broadway now in a way I don't think that we've seen, at least in recent memory. And that is going to open the doors to new generations of Broadway goers and theater goers by telling their stories in really intentional and thoughtful ways. So I think that is really, really great and bodes well for the future. And then there was also a lot of conversation this season around ticket prices for Othello in particular, and how those prices just like skyrocketed and went through the roof. But that led to a huge conversation about access when it comes to ticket prices and how people access not only Broadway shows, but touring Broadway across the country, what we're looking at in terms of costs, right, for regional theaters and things like that. So I think that's actually a really positive conversation, and keeping that in the forefront of our minds, even as we're dealing with all these other things. There was, again, like anything we can do to keep those access conversations going, I think is a positive in my book.
And at the same time, keeping in mind that Broadway is 100% a commercial venture.
Yeah.
And is not just an art venture. It is 100% commercially driven. Profit and return to investors is at the top of mind for every producer that is there.
I mean, but if people keep paying those ticket prices, I mean, it's not going to drop down.
And one thing that we were talking about just before we got on here was that the ticket prices for Harry Potter have just shot through the roof. The ticket prices for Hamilton have just shot through the roof because you've got big name talents dropping back in. And the amount of big names that are on Broadway right now is the biggest difference that we're seeing in the Broadway weekly revenue reports. It is the big star names that are driving these ticket sales, because people aren't going to see Othello. People are going to see Denzel Washington. People aren't going to see Goodnight and Good Luck. People are going to see George Clooney. The tickets for Hamilton, whenever Leslie Odom announced that he's going back in, went up 6-fold for the balcony seats. I say sixfold. It might have been threefold. But nonetheless, I love a good exaggeration.
Look, this isn't a math podcast. It's fine. Sixfold, but call it 20.
Yeah. But it is big names that are driving the ticket sales. It is not shows. I mean, even with maybe Happy Ending, Darren Criss is not a small name. Darren Criss is an established personality through film, TV, and Broadway.
Yeah, but I would say, I mean, of all those examples, I mean, he
is the smallest name, yes. Which is probably why it took until after the Tonys for the prices on maybe Happy Ending to go up so much.
I think the really interesting thing is that we're talking about just the representation on Broadway right now and through the Tony Awards. The Tony Awards had a 40% increase in viewership. Yeah. And that's a huge thing. I mean, the best since 2019. So the work that's being done to change those things on Broadway and to change things in the Tonys is obviously working. And so, what will be interesting to see is that in the next couple of seasons, is what's driving that increase in Tony's viewership the shows, or is it having Cynthia Erivo just fresh off of Wicked and still and pushing the next installment, which one's driving that?
Let's be honest. Any chance that we can take advantage of giant commercial success to push theater forward in the minds of the United States public and the world's public, we should take advantage of.
Absolutely.
Taking advantage of Wicked's now success 20 years after it initially premiered.
Yeah.
And it being thrust to the top of mind for everyone in this country. And Cynthia Erivo as a personality being the face of that. Let's take advantage of it. Bring her into the Tonys. Let people see what's new and upcoming with all of the productions doing a production number at the Tonys, showing the diversity on the screen and how successful it is with the diversity. This is where we're going to be successful. Taking advantage of commercial success for the success of upstart theater.
Well, and I think, capitalizing on the narrative too of Audra McDonald being the most awarded Tony performer, and then seeing her performance and then the dialogue and that has happened around the adaptation of Gypsy with the focus on a Black family. There's a whole dialogue that has happened in the week after the Tony Awards, and people are interrogating that and talking about it in really meaningful ways and trying to understand the artistic choices. And the dialogue is better than I expected it to be. And I think it's opening up another door for people that are curious about that and want to understand the history and the artistry as well as the commercial, because that performance, holy cow. So I think we as an industry did a much better job this year capitalizing on those opportunities and drawing narratives around the performers that they had access to, the stories that were being told. I think we sometimes don't do a good job around that. And I think we did a much better job this year.
And one of those things being CNN doing a live stream of George Clooney's show.
Yes.
Of Good Night and Good Luck on CNN Live. And the viewership numbers were 7 million something, which are huge. And so it's things like that are propelling it forward, and it's wonderful. I was just at the Napalm retreat a couple of weeks ago, and there was a lot of discussion around community within the industry. And there was a lot of discussion about using each other as resources to build better and build forward. And that gave me so much hope. I came out of the Napalm retreat really invigorated, and I enjoyed my time there. But just the beauty of a retreat where it is a no business zone for Napalm, as in you're not pitching, it's a no pitch zone. And being there with colleagues, sharing time, sharing conversations, just having that togetherness in a relaxed setting like that was so refreshing. And I didn't mind the closing of it being a beach trip, which was pretty fabulous. So
more beaches at Arts conferences. I feel like that is the lesson for the last year is more beaches.
More beaches.
Florida Venue Managers Association happens on a beach resort.
Love it.
Which I'll be heading to on Sunday.
Yay, Kevin.
Josh, actually, I will piggyback off that a little bit. Sort of thinking about what, we're doing locally here, and when I say locally, I mean FSU, we're looking at ways that we can integrate opening nights into the university setting a bit more. And so it's creating like these really interesting partnerships. So it's meeting with the Institute of Governance and Civics, and it's meeting with student affairs, and it's meeting with business colleges to talk about how we can integrate the arts into those programs. And sometimes, have their programs integrated into ours. So it is, sort of on that same lines of, building back different and building back better through community partnerships. And for us, like obviously we're partnering with other arts entities, but we're also looking at it from a different light for, and figuring out like what are the low hanging fruit. So for governance and civics, like it's America's 250, looking at some great ways to partner on that sort of programming and looking at it like that. That's exciting to me to see how we can put art in front of a different audience, and sometimes put different art in front of our audience.
At opening nights, are you primarily focusing on the university, or are you also looking at the community as well within that scope?
Yeah, so we are both on and off campus. So we focus on both things. Right now, our focus is a bit more campus related, just because we've done a good job integrating into the community, because sometimes that can be a bit easier as like the university sections get so siloed. So we're focusing a bit more on the university side, but a lot of those folks that we're talking on the university side are excited that we have sort of the outside connections that will bring other folks to their programs that aren't currently involved with FSU.
Well, while I always enjoy a piggyback from Kevin, I'm so happy that we've had this conversation today. I feel like while there are things that really concern us, we are all moving in really positive directions, and that we can see positive things ahead of us. And I challenge everyone out there to try and look through that lens right now. While there are things that you're worried about, really focus on and look at what is positive in front of you, both currently and what you see building ahead of you, and what that can do for your programs and with your programs. And we also encourage organizations to look at how they can work within their communities to improve things for both themselves and their communities in these times, and also not worry about potential funding withdrawals before they've happened. Focus on what you can do now, how you're operating now, and if those things do come, look at how you can slim things down without cutting what is benefiting your communities. With that, we will see you next week right here on There's No Business Like.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening to There's No Business Like. Our producers and hosts are Brian Zelmer, Josh Benson, Kevin Maynard, Katie Miller, and me, Danielle Van Hook. Views expressed in this podcast are ours alone and are not reflective of the organizations we are a part of. Keep up with us at nobusinesslike.com. There you'll find links to all of our episodes and socials. If you like this podcast, give us a like, a follow, a review, or our favorite, a 5-star rating. Oh wait, what was that site? I got it, don't worry. It is nobusinesslike.com. Do I sound out bus-I-ness every time I type it? Yep, sure do. Stay in touch, my friends.
Kevin.
Did you forget my name?
No, I was thinking about how to make fun of Brian and Danielle for not being here.
Gotcha.